for coming to the March meeting of the Board of Architecture Review and Planning Board. We'll begin by taking the roll of those who are either here or not.
Joseph Clark, Chairman.
He is here.
Michael Beldotti.
Here.
John Fry.
Here.
Kaya Gam.
Here.
Jeffrey Gizbaro.
Here.
Jesus Lopez.
Here.
Walter Ludlam is not present. Lynn Brooks Omni, Director of Planning and Development.
Here.
And Stuart Kahan, Corporation Counsel.
Here.
Okay, so let's move to the BAR first item, 49 Spring Street.
Mr. Chairman, they are adjourned. You guys, this board requested that they go to the ZBA, and they just submitted an application, and they will be appearing before them.
Okay, so we will table that and move on to application number 2, 50 Underhill Road. Applicant seeking BAR approval for the construction of a new single-family residence. Is there someone here to speak to that tonight?
Sure. So just to let you know, they actually, this.
You don't have to sit. Go ahead. Work your way up to that.
So this applicant actually received the BAR approval from this board back in June of 2017.
Okay.
But they hired a new architect and they redesigned the facade, and the building inspector sent them back to you guys to re-review.
Does it look completely different?
It looks quite a bit different.
Okay.
Fine. Now-
Oh, I just wanted to introduce my new architect, Julie Evans.
Okay, so good. So I'm glad you're here because it's different. It would be bad if you were here because it's the same.
That's true.
Okay.
Okay, so, we've made some refinements since the submission of a month and a half ago. Just, so exterior materials, and there are a couple of notes. So if you want to refer to this, it's current. Little changes, no changes to mass, height, program, volume, but some refinements to the exteriors. Not sure how many sheets you want on paper. So, as before, my client, Mia Nadaski, is interested in constructing a single-family home at 50 Underhill, and it's a undeveloped lot. A couple things to note. Initially, one change on the first page of that sheet on the zoning table, it didn't reflect that, in fact, the lot is an approved subdivided lot, and although the front edge is less than 100 feet, if you go 30 feet back, it is 100 feet. So that variance to the minimum front yard was approved in 1979. So our original document didn't reflect that, but just so you know, it's an approved lot. And then, although we're starting fresh, the home design that was submitted last year was very similar in scale and footprint. The main thing we did in terms of massing was to orient the house more to the south, more directly to the south. So we cranked the house so now it's facing south and also has better views of the Chilmark Park. So we're in a neighborhood, as you know, that is already pretty well established. It's eclectic. The homes, most of them are pretty private. We have hedgerows. There's a variety of kind of street orientations and frontality. And what we're looking to do here is a home that it is not really imposing from the front, but is a pretty comfortable home. And the way it's looking now is a little bit like this. So the form, we have Actually, I'll work off the site. So with the pie-shaped lot, you know, we're responding to, you know, ins and outs of the setbacks. You kind of step up and down away from it. And then it kind of works its way into the south-facing main rooms. There's a car court in front. There's really not enough room for a turnaround driveway, but there will be a car court. And the entrance is a little bit of a courtyard entrance. And it's nice to see those up there. That's good for us. So if you look at the upper left, that little view is above, okay, so the middle left view is the true front elevation. But when we slice away the section there, you can see a little bit more of the true front entry, which is hiding a little bit behind the garage. And then to the right, we see the west elevation, the garage, and then stepping down the hill to the main mass of the house.
Which drawings are we looking at?
So, yeah, okay. So that's essentially the west elevation here. This is the guest room wing. This volume is kitchen, living, dining. South elevation shows kitchen, living, dining with deck and covered porch. And then the east facade, to the far right, we see the garage, mudroom areas, then the bedroom wing, a little bump out for a shared vanity area between the lower level bedrooms. And I've kind of lightly rendered these plans, you know, fairly.
Just turn around so
Yeah.
she can capture it on the camera.
Okay. Yeah, so we're looking at charcoal metal roofs, board and batten siding, probably composite products, hardy for durability for sure. Stone veneer at the base that kind of steps up the hill. And then a little bit of infill areas that would switch from the board and batten to clapboard, and then in a darker gray tone. So windows, we're looking at black frame metal exterior windows, probably weather shield. Simple combinations of awning, casements, transoms, and the like.
Question
Yes.
for you. The roof here, I guess this is the entrance?
Yes.
The pitch there, is that going to be adequate for a standing seam roof, or what's your feeling
Right.
about that? Because I
We-
know typically,
Yeah, this is that's about the only volumetric change since what I submitted there. That's now going to be a shallow
okay.
gable roof, and that'll be similar to the pitch of
Yeah,
the
pitch in the
porch
back,
in the back.
right, yeah.
Yeah, so we have two sort of families of roofs, the steeper roofs for the bedroom volumes and the like, and then some of the outbuildings structures have shallower pitches.
Question about
Yes.
the material for the roof, black.
Well-
How are you thinking about, you know, sound absorption and stuff like that? Insulation, what are your thoughts about, you know, the fact that you're using a dark roof that's got...
Right, well, I mean, at a minimum, we're gonna meet energy code for insulation, for sure. One thing that we're looking at with the south facade is that it's a simple enough roof form that one could, you know, certainly go to solar at some point. So we're planning on, you know, an amply insulated home. And then you know, if the material is charcoal, we're gonna be sampling, I mean, whether it's black, or, you know, whether it works its way back to, you know, more of a medium charcoal. It's kind of where we'll be. So, I understand that it's not as, it's not a white roof, it's not a, you know, a cool roof.
The gray stone veneer to be determined, is it is the determining factor going to be a natural material or
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and what I'm looking into, there are veneers, okay, there are veneers that are this thick, and then there are also, you know, veneers that are about this thick, so you have some believability in the surface. And we have, you know, a nice water table at the bottom of the board and batten siding, which can give us a little bit of room to kick out if we need to, without being too complex with the foundation. So we're trying to simplify the lines enough that it's, you know, it's achievable and well proportioned. You know, kind of a simple family of details with variety of window types, etc. So.
Any other questions from the board?
I think the 3D images really help when visualizing what the house is gonna look like when it's done.
Any questions from the other side of the table? Any questions from the public? No questions from the public. Okay. So, is there a motion to approve the plan submitted tonight?
So moved.
John, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Michael, all in favor?
Aye.
So now that we're done with that, the only comment I have is, have you thought about an elevator to the second floor?
You can ask my client.
What?
The elevator to the second floor?
Elevating the second floor?
Not necessarily now, but in the plan, having an opportunity where one might go in?
Yes, from the loft area on top of where the living room, dining room is. I'm gonna leave it as unfinished space for myself, but it's gonna be storage, and then it could be a potential for like a playroom or something like that, because that facade from the back side is gonna be.
Only because as I reach my middle age, I
Okay,
continue
he's
to
an
think about how do I
elevator.
get to the second floor?
Oh, you mean no stairs to a bedroom?
Well, you have a stair, but at some point,
There's a
Stair
bedroom in
plus.
the front that's an office/bedroom with a full bathroom attached to it, that's on one level.
There's a first floor.
so you would just abandon the second floor.
Yeah, right. Hopefully not for quite some time, but yes.
Okay. So, let's
Compared to, just one question.
Yes.
Just compared to the house that is right next to it to the right, which is also low and
Right.
set back a little bit further on the property, how is that? It looks like it is a
Our-
little bit, or is it about the same?
Our footprint will be smaller.
Okay.
But it's
The-
not level with that house.
But it's not
As far as
level
the-
with it in
Yeah,
terms
it's
of-
like,
yeah.
yeah, my kitchen is a little behind their back, but yeah, about
Okay.
level with that house.
All right, it just gives me a
Little
picture
further back.
and understanding. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, super. Okay, so we will adjourn the part of our quick review and go on to the planning board. First application, Plateau Associates, that was adjourned.
It is. They requested to be back on the April agenda.
Okay, moving along to Croton Avenue.
They requested in front of you last month to return in April, so they're gonna return to the April agenda.
Can we get a number for that? Because when it becomes a building, it needs a number. Who assigns the number?
It's the fire department, police department, and Westchester County 911, and I can start the process. It's, yeah,
We don't have a number.
It's got, I mean, it's got a tax lot.
there's a tax lot number.
But
It's, I mean, the number's probably
But
based on
people
what
read this
the,
agenda on wherever we post it, they're gonna go out.
That's a good point.
Okay, so let's 25 Terrace Avenue, what's going on with that?
so they are adjourned right now. They have, they submitted new documentation, and Keller Sessions reviewed it, and we're waiting to get the calculations signed and sealed by a licensed professional so that it can be certified. As soon as they submit that data and Keller Sessions
So it's
reviews it
moving
again.
along?
Yes,
Lumber.
yes.
Okay.
So
Victoria Home.
they are looking to make site plan changes, and they've asked to adjourn until they can come back with all their site plan changes,
Because
financial issues potentially.
According to Mr. Venditti and his clients, there were certain issues with regard to financing. They had to cut a few $1 million out of the project, and that will change some of the plans. Primarily, it may mean that some of the single rooms will have to become doubles, and they may have to take, put individual air conditioning units in, or put one main unit on the roof instead of having individual units and windows and things like that. They're still working on it, which is why we have not heard back from them. And they are, of course, under a deadline to get a shovel in the ground. So they're aware of that, but I know that they've had, there have been some financing issues.
When is, I'm sorry, Joe.
No, I'm just, I have nothing to add.
I know.
What, they need to get through.
Yep.
When does the extent, I know we extended their approval. When does that, when's the
I thought that they had to have shovels in the ground by July of this year.
I believe that their extension was
So the
till
approval
July.
is
It's no longer us that's
No,
the
it's
problem.
not.
It's their
Yeah, the state said they have to have shovels in the ground by July, and I think they're gonna have 18 months to complete it.
They had, yeah, and
So-
they can ask for another 6-month extension from the state, and I presume that they've done that, knowing that their timeline is
Okay.
very short, but.
Well, let me just make, because we've been to this rodeo before. They've got a timeline, drop dead intersection on the
Right.
back end of this. They've got site plan notions brewing, apparently. And so, I don't know how we communicate that we, we would like to not be under this imposed leverage of, we've got to have, you need to approve this and you need to approve it now, because we have a serious drop dead. It's just, it's very frustrating when we're under that kind of.
So let's do this differently. Since we accommodated at the last, they know when their deadline is.
Correct.
We need at least 3 months.
Right.
Okay.
So they can do the math. Because it's changing the site plan, it's gotta be re-noticed, the public will be back,
Correct.
et cetera, et cetera. So just so that, as John pointed out, they need to work to their deadline, but we have time constraints as well.
Understood.
So,
When Lynn and I met with them a few weeks back, I think they were actually hoping to be here this month,
This month,
Uh,
last month, even.
because they were working both from the finance end and then also with the plans. Since we've not heard, we will follow up
so
with
they
them to make
must
them
be
clear.
here next month,
Yeah,
the way I
effectively.
define that. Okay.
Right,
Fully prepared.
got it.
Okay. So we'll adjourn that and we'll move to 86 South Highland Avenue.
That's,
Adjourn.
that is adjourned.
Is the Board of Zoning Appeals still contemplating it?
They haven't applied to the Board of Zoning Appeals, you guys sent them to the Board of
Sure.
Zoning Appeals, that's, yes.
So,
Would
how
this
long
board
ago
like
did
to-
we send them to the Board of Zoning Appeals?
I think so, like 6 months ago.
So send them a letter that says that they're not before the Board of Zoning Appeals at the next session, we're gonna remove them.
You mean the April meeting?
Whatever the next.
They missed the
logical-
deadline to apply for the
Right,
April
so
meeting.
whatever it is, they gotta be there, because we're not gonna carry this forever.
But if they're already on the agenda, it's not so much reapplying. Can't they just say that we're gonna
Well, we
attend the meeting?
keep adjourning it forever. What I'm saying is that there's been no movement. Our usual rule is two meetings and we remove it. Okay, and now we're not there. So,
Are they in court as well? I mean, is this a court issue with,
I don't think I don't know if they're.
I'm not sure if there's an outstanding violation on this one. I would have to double check. I'm not certain if there is. I don't know, but we can certainly write to the applicant and advise them they gotta move.
Otherwise it becomes one of these, it's been sitting on the planning board for 6 months
Yeah.
and no action, and it's not up to us.
Right.
Right? The record, while it indicates it, it's never promulgated that way. Okay, so that gets adjourned until we sort it out. Because, yeah, we have to be here next week. Okay, so 49 Spring Street.
They're part of the BAR application, and they just submitted to the zoning board, and it'll be before them in April.
Okay, Maple Lodge.
We just had a meeting with them last week. They're not gonna attend this meeting, and they're looking to resubmit
Okay.
and get stuff to us for your next meeting.
Perfect. Okay, 35 Croton Avenue. Did they figure out where they're
They
parking their
are
cars?
still, their architect is redrawing a bunch of plans and hoping to receive a submittal shortly. It was anticipated to be submitted in the,
So
by the last
same
deadline.
story. Not here in April.
Mhm.
And that is a matter that's in justice court.
Oh, well then, is this the remediated, or are we waiting for a judge's decision?
We're not waiting for a judge's decision, it was adjourned, but the violations are multiple, so it doesn't just deal with remediation. There was a lack of a building permit, there were other outside issues as well.
Because if something that the court's doing relies on, what we're, is dependent on that, if the court's decision is dependent on what happens here, then we need to adjourn until the court finishes their process. But if it's independent of what's going on in court, then we
Right.
don't.
And the court one I know was adjourned today, I think to a May date, so I'll be able to
All right.
put everything
So
together.
one way or the other, right, it's either, it's in court and we have to wait, or it's not in court and they need to be back there. Okay. So that takes care of all the current business, old business of the board, anything under old business of the board? No?
Not this time.
Not this time? Okay, and so the old business is Dan Beaton, it's still.
It's still hanging out
All
there.
right.
They're both still hanging out there.
All right, so, you all have received the minutes of the last meeting? Any errors, omissions, corrections? No? Do I have their motion to approve the minutes as submitted? I looks like she wants to do that.
Yes,
Good.
that's fine.
And is there a second?
A second.
Good. All in favor? Aye. Okay. So then, we have before us yet another referral from the village board regarding affordable housing legislation, which I think you all received in email recently. And so, Stuart, would you like to introduce what it is that they expect us to do?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. The board has had multiple discussions on revising Chapter 62, which is the Affordable Housing Ordinance. There have been two lengthy work sessions, and I do mean lengthy, where we went into this. And what is before you now is the third iteration of a proposed revision article for the Chapter 62. There is still a lot of discussion on the board in terms of what the numbers should be, and there are certain things that are in this proposed local law which are there because I took it from different statutes, some of the Yonkers statute and some from some other locations. Some things that are in here were based completely on consensus of the board. Others are still subject to discussion. But at the end of the last meeting, which was last Wednesday, the mayor had suggested that the land use boards provide their recommendations or opinions with regard to the proposed legislation. So I sent to Lynn, and Amy King was good enough to forward to everybody, the draft of the local law here. What it does is a couple of things. One, As you know, currently we are at a 10% set aside at 80% annual median income. 80% or less, thank you. We're now, the proposal would be to raise the set aside to 20% at a 60% AMI. That would be for rentals. For home ownership, it would be a 20% set aside, but it's 70% or less of AMI. One of the other things that was discussed by the board dealt with some of the larger projects in excess of 100 units. And the board was interested in what is a model that Yonkers has, where they have a sliding scale, or if it is 100 or more units, the 20% set aside will vary from 30% AMI, I think we went up to 60% AMI, depending, and you break it up, X percent having to be within each different AMI area. This proposal here also has a new definition of something called very low income, and that's because it's pointed out by Trustee Herrera that low income for purposes of affordable housing has a very definitive meaning, particularly under the HUD regulations, and it's, I believe, within 80% or less, while very low income is considered 50% of AMI or less. So that was, that was in there. And so those are, some of the changes here. There was an additional there was an additional 5% density bonus, but there was a significant amount of discussion by the board as to the idea of the density bonus itself. Some of the board members were of the view that why basically is a developer getting a density bonus for effectively doing what the law requires anyway, which is you have to do a set aside. So in other words, you're getting a set aside, but you're then getting a bonus on top of the set aside. That's not an additional density, that's just what the statute provides right now. We give 10% if you simply meet, you do your 10%, you're gonna get 10%.
Was there an attempt to answer the why, or were there answers to the why?
The sense, well, let me just say it this way, some of the board members' view was that they had absolutely no problem with simply giving, providing the developer with that bonus, even, because the thought was that the only way that the developer could get out of the bonus would be that they'd have to pay the per unit charge, which I think now is up to $350,000 per unit, because they increased the fee was increased by the board.
Because it seems to me if you haven't answered that question, or you don't understand the answer to the question, or you have an alternate answer to the question, you can't get to the solution.
I can say this, that there was a lot of talking, but I would not say that there was a specific answer to that very basic question, which, to be honest, hung up a number of board members, because the very thought was, if you're simply doing what you're supposed to do by law, why am I then giving you an additional 10%? And
but what I'm suggesting is the answer to the question helps understand what the first part of that is. But that's assuming the first part, or the initial assumption, is valid and works and doesn't have a downside in and of itself.
Right. I think that there's a, without tipping any hands or predisposing where the board is, there is a sense that they want to make some changes to the affordable housing. I think exactly where those numbers come in, it's unclear. They're aware that obviously in certain zones there are other density bonuses that come in, and how that might impact here. But there's a sense of seeing what can be done both from the set-aside number as well as from the AMI number. So they're looking at it really from both perspectives. And 2060 was numbers that they discussed a lot.
Yes.
And went over, but there were other, things that had been in some of the earlier drafts that I had taken out, based upon the requests of the board. A lot of the original draft of the revision was based upon the county's standard, statutes, which they have, which now actually, I believe, is 60% AMI for residential, and but is, I think, 70 or 80% for purchase housing. So that's why, but the board wanted to basically get the input from you folks as well as from the ZBA next month to get a sense of what the thoughts were with regard to, what these proposals are, and something that I would obviously take back to them and let them know, and make whatever changes or revisions have to be made there. But
It's tough to know
Complicated.
what the ask is, because I think, at least for me, this is a predominantly administrative tool. It has some planning and zoning ramifications based on a potential density bonus. But other than that, it's a way, it seems to me that it's an administrative, policy-driven initiative towards trying to achieve more and better affordable housing thing. So it's tough, again, for me, to comment on a tool that seems to be, to me, an administrative, policy-driven tool, as opposed to an integrated planning and zoning.
But there's a piece, one is the administrative piece, which says, okay, so 20% of the dwelling units now have to be at whatever index is set. Nothing changes to the zone. It just says, if you want to build here, this is what you have to go by. The second part, though, is the additional density bonus. If you want to even go lower, we're going to give you an additional 5%, I
Right.
guess, for, without any mathematics going into the impact of that
Yeah.
in any way, shape, or form.
Right,
And
I
think-
agree. I said that was the.
And I think, and there are a couple of, I mean, so you're right, from a planning point of view, hard to say. If you're asking us, do we, from an economic point of view, what does this do to us and in the future development? That's a question we have to go get data for, because we don't have any data. The other thing, though, is and when it comes to buy, because I read here, buy or rent, buying is harder, because I don't know the mechanism where the government underwrites the difference between fair market purchase price and the 60, 70, 50% acquisition price that they want to set here. So how do you get the other 50%? Does it, there's no math for me to see that. On the
Well,
rental.
I would offer there are programs, but they're not individually allotted programs. The developer is given the financial difference in purchase
From
scenarios.
somebody.
Right, from,
IDA,
Right.
all different sorts of
Right.
things,
So
sales
so
tax
you got, so you
rebate.
come from someplace. And then, it becomes so is that rate then set for the tax base? Or does the taxes, are they assessed at 100% even though the money came from someplace else? Right, because that affects the school
oh,
district.
that guy gets the big bucks.
When you say the money, can I just have some clarification? You say when the money comes from somewhere else?
Right, well, the money, as I said, there's an IDA that rolls a check here, apparently. Right.
There's subsidies,
So,
there's a lot of subsidized.
Somebody gets $1 million, some developer gets $1 million to underwrite the difference between the affordable rate that's set, that you buy the house for, the dwelling unit, and the fair market rate. Whatever that money is, comes in two pieces. When you go to closing, the developer gets a check from some agency for peace, and he gets a check from some
I
individual.
don't know if
for
that's
some
always
peace.
the case under every affordable home ownership program.
Well, but it's coming from someplace.
Right, there's a lot of
Well,
different aspects.
Well, it's just like in a rental where essentially it's a burden to have to rent at a lesser rate. It's the same thing if you're gonna build a large development that's gonna be sold as condos or for some form of ownership, and they're gonna be for purchase, it's gonna come off in the end, your bottom line.
The cash gotta come from someplace.
It doesn't have to necessarily come from someplace, it's
Well,
just.
no,
Well,
it has to
I mean,
come,
in terms
it
of
always
numbers,
comes.
in terms of numbers, I mean, I went through this afternoon, and it just because I
Well,
like to.
let's finish this.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, but it's,
Well, I want to
Okay.
finish with
Well,
Jeff.
But I would offer, before we get sideways
I
in this
didn't
discussion,
understand.
there are at least 20 examples here in Westchester
Right.
of how this is, the mechanism,
Right.
right? And whether the money has been given to specific components of infrastructure, and then that was prorated to a specific set of unit numbers as reduced selling costs, there's all kinds of, but the money's coming from somewhere.
Okay. But in the end, how does that affect? Yeah, maybe go back to,
Well,
and so
because it
based
has to
upon
do
that,
with-
what's the, I don't understand.
But it
what
has
the-
to do with fundamentally the economic plan.
And the
For
tax.
Marcus Raymond, right. Because at some point, there's a fiduciary responsibility of the people running this government to ensure that there's a sustainability of the tax base and is not an overbearing burden on the current taxpayers. There are a number of issues that we can get into about where we are in terms of that ratio right now, but that's not the point. The point is that the money's gotta come from someplace. So if we expect people to develop here, organically grow up, then we've gotta have some clear path for how to be viable, or they're not gonna build. And then we get nothing. So we have to figure out how to get something, right, and who's gonna pay. So, and the reason that I sort of separated the rental from the buy is because the rental is a clearer path to me. Because there's a bucket of money that comes in, we do it today with various other housing programs, where somebody, if it's 80% is a check written by the renter, they get the 20% from someplace else, and the landlord is made whole, and that's okay. If we double down on that, which goes from 80 to 60, in my mind, that says we help 50% less people, because the bucket doesn't change,
Well, and
unless the bucket changes.
so there's the next page of where does the money come from?
and.
Let me
Yeah,
just
go ahead.
finish this thought. And if we look at communities, so there's data, right? Again, we can all go out and find the data. And there are examples here in Westchester that if the leverage to lower specific unit costs, whether they're rental or purchase, isn't coming through specific sources that are applied to infrastructure or whatever, and then prorated, where does it come from? It comes from the other, in this example, the other 80% of the units have price creep.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I mean by, it's either comes off the bottom line or
right, and
to
then,
make the overall project.
and then by
viable.
default, does that become a tax leverage? Is that and some communities have defined that as another form of assessment that's illegal.
I mean, we have, even already, based on Dworka's work, and I actually have to crunch numbers in order to understand it and see it on a spreadsheet. So I did some very rudimentary some numbering this afternoon. We are, already the lowest, one of the lowest in terms of median income compared to Town of Austin, compared to Briarcliff, and certainly all of Westchester County. That's a given. And the ratio of the different, currently based on his, we have 7,832 households that are under the considered low income. And if we divide that by number of the population, that's roughly 3 people per household, right? So, if we go through these computations here, computations about proposed potential percentage of income at the 60% rate, we're looking at, we're looking at a difference in let's say rental cost, if you are still sticking with the 30% max of your income. At what we have now, which is 80%, at $1,779, is all based on Dorcas numbers, and 60%, $1,334 in rent. Now, the current median monthly rent in Austining is $1,418. Of course, it does not take into account the big discrepancies between different parts of our population. But for instance, when you look at the distribution of households by family situation, we have married couples, 3,695. We have male householder of no wife present, 551. We have female householders, no husband present, 1,209. 2 groups that definitely needs to be helped. And then we have the non-family household, which is 2,368. That's the bucket that covers everything from a person living in a studio apartment to 5 or 6 people living together, either in an apartment or in a house. That is the biggest variable that I can't see, we have no real understanding of. And with this here, I just see that we have, with the amount of open land we have, what's owned by the village, what is owned by others, that can accommodate building structures big enough for anybody to come in and say, we can do this and still make our money. That's going to be, those numbers, we have to do that math. And, up to 99 units, you're going from 10 affordable units to 20. That's a big chunk. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I am not saying I'm against this at all. But I really do feel that if we put something like this, it's a good, feel-good document, but if it doesn't do anything, if it really, when it comes down to, it really doesn't help the people that we need to help, because we do not have the properties that are big enough, and we do not have the current open land that's big enough to accommodate new buildings like this, then we're just in the wind, as I say.
So that's an interesting comment, and I started thinking about your $350,000 if you don't build affordable housing. And since I presume everybody that's in Austining is housed, whether they're housed correctly or not is a different question. But if we could take that, I mean, if somebody said, look, I'm not going to build 3 affordable housing units, it's $1 million, and we took that $1 million and we put it into a fund that rehabbed
and land trust
that rehabbed existing housing to bring the standards up. Because if we don't have a plan that fixes, presumably these people are already here, and we're going to upgrade their housing. If we don't do something about the back end, somebody else is going to move in, and we haven't solved the problem because somebody now is just sitting in housing that now we have to go fix.
Yep.
So we've never had a good back end to do this, not since the 60s.
Yep.
I mean, well, actually, in the 60s, there was a bad plan. It was a good plan at the time, but turned out to be a bad plan. We knocked the other stuff down, and we have holes in all of Main Street now because of it. But if we had a plan like we had in the 70s, where we actually had money to go into neighborhoods and upgraded people's existing housing, allowed them to stay there in a better environment than they had before, then I think we uplift the whole community. And the second thing I think we do is and the thing that's missing here is that we need to create an engine to improve the economic stability of the people here. Because, labor looks for, like water, it looks for the path of least resistance. Cheaper is always better. But we have to help the people upgrade their economic stature in this community. And I think we have to find a way to do that. And there are some examples of that. If you if you think about even Peekskill, what they've done in the last 3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
they've shifted their entire view about how they deal with businesses that come into the community. And they've made it actually, I don't know, I think it still continues under the new leadership there, that how do we help businesses thrive in Austin that will hire local people and pay them reasonable wages. There are other things going on. There are people who want to start incubators in Austin who will do exactly the same thing, create entrepreneurs. But I don't know that I get, and I think you're right, Kaya, the immediate problem is it seems like a really good idea to create all this housing. But I don't know that we've solved the problem by doing it.
Well,
That's
I mean,
my
if I, and pardon me if I'm paraphrasing,
Isn't this done?
but if I take Kaya's thread
Everybody
and I
just
take
see it.
your thread, Joe,
And you sent it.
and I continue to weave that, it seems to me that from a planning board perspective, the notion is proactive development strategies are likely, and I think again, that's provable in case studies, going to yield better results. Better real world and equitable results that don't tilt the meter in either direction toward pro-developer or penalize developer. And where I thought Kaya was about to go is the idea that there are latent village properties. And the latent village properties have an opportunity to be activated in a public-private scenario where the village now has skin in the game to proactively address affordable housing as opposed to a latent administrative policy, which may have other consequences that are hard to identify, but I suspect are on the horizon.
I think you're right about that. And if we go back to the 60s, 70s, when we actually had an urban renewal agency. That was the funding mechanism to do many of the things we talked about. So there was an overall strategy for how to do this, and it combined some redevelopment. We got Snowden House, Maple House, out of those things that addressed lower income housing and addressed senior housing, two areas that we needed to fix. And what we didn't do is we knocked the stuff down behind them,
Right.
instead of rehabbing them.
That proactively produced units,
Right.
perhaps not in a, upon retrospect, it wasn't the right planning and built environment
Right.
methodology, but the strategy was there.
Right.
And I think the strategy included the community having skin in the game. You know, I hesitate using that, but that's the commitment, right? Because I think that sends a message across the board. It sends a message to people who really need affordable housing, that this community is prepared to invest in that. I think it sends a message to developers that we recognize we're going to proactively address the need as a community, but perhaps there's still a portion of it that's assigned to a developer, maybe not as aggressively as it is here. Or, you know, I hesitate using the word aggressive. Maybe not to the extent that it's suggested here. But it seems to me that's the exciting possibility, right? That's the scenario I think many of us could get behind from a planning and development.
I think we also have to think about the kind of development we want to have. Because I don't know that we're building what people actually
Well,
want.
this is an opportunity to help be a partner, or I mean, to create a scenario where you're a partner in defining what it is we want to be built.
Right, and development trusts, even a public-private partnership is one way you can go around about that.
Right.
I mean, I'm looking at section 4.7, which, you know, is sort of something I would like for you to explain to me. with respect to an application for development under this section, the village board has the authority to waive all use area, volume, bulk, land, and building requirements to the full extent authorized by 7-738 of the village law. Now, I don't recall what 7-738 is, so I don't know what that really means.
This actually came from one of the local jurisdictions up here. I do not, well, I take pride of authorship. I don't take pride of every word. But it was put in there because there were, and in fact, there was a discussion, one of the discussions at last week's board meeting was essentially how much bonus density essentially becomes too much bonus density. Would it result in 9-story buildings or 7-story buildings along Croton Avenue? Would you suddenly have these massive buildings because you're just adding you're getting unit on top of unit on top of unit? But one of the localities in Westchester, and I apologize, I don't recall which one, actually had this particular provision which essentially allowed the village board perhaps to pursue the more affordable housing, to waive any other requirements that otherwise would appear. Now, I should point out that these generally came from localities that had significant problems with affordable housing. So they were essentially, if you remember with the lawsuit brought by HUD, one of the few municipalities that was not sued was the village of Osner. Most of these came from those other municipalities, which in fact were parties to that lawsuit, because they did not have sufficient affordable housing. And one of the municipalities put in this particular provision. Now, again, it's subject to discussion. This was not something that was in any lengthy discussion before the board, but I think it was just something that I put in there more to generate discussion from them to see is that in some way that they wanted to go, because I know that there was some consideration. But again, I don't know where it came from, but it did come from somewhere.
I had another question about this because I actually printed out Village Law 7-738. And it relates to approval of cluster development, and this section of New York State law, it's not our local village law, says the Village Board of Trustees may by local law authorize the planning board to approve a cluster development simultaneously with the approval of a plat during subdivision review. And so my question is, this is talking about waiving use, area, volume, bulk, land and building requirements, which is just about every type of requirement that we have from a zoning perspective. And I just don't see how that even relates to cluster development. When you're talking about waiving use, you're talking about, so I honestly don't understand this section, and it seems to me like it almost authorized the village board to grant a variance from all of our zoning laws. So there's some other things in here I really like, but I just don't understand this particular section. And if it's for discussion, then I question it.
Again, it is for discussion.
Yeah.
And it is on the books in at least one municipality in Westchester County now. So it didn't, did not, in other words, it didn't come out of this fertile brain, I can tell you.
And I would say that there are some communities in Westchester that I could get that, because their zoning is so restrictive that you can't possibly generate what you need to generate to make this happen. We have a lot of flexibility in our zoning laws today, by definition.
But part and parcel to that, there are communities that the marketplace can easily absorb the kinds of leverage this creates. And so I suspect by default, those also correspond to the communities that were scrambling to implement something.
Exactly right.
So it's tough to know that without knowing the community, I'm not gonna, that scenario is germane to our scenario.
Well, by the way, if we were not sued, somebody in the universe thinks that we have a reasonable balance already. Right?
Well, that's a part of this discussion.
And again, I think the problem is not with what we build, it's how do we fix what we have. And,
That's part of the discussion.
and,
I agree.
and, you know, and by the way, most of the problem areas that we have would actually be addressed in that paragraph that Jeff was just talking about, because the densities are a lot higher, the lots are a lot smaller. There's a, you know, if we think about where those might lie, they're not lying on just Premier Drive. They're in the tracks of our downtown.
I mean, my question that I wanted to go back to kind of just more fundamentally, we already have a 10% set aside. What, and Stuart, I'm sure, looking at other communities, how radically different is a 20%? If you just look at that component, 10 to 20.
20% is actually, as an overall, that you would not see. You do see in some municipalities, and I apologize, I didn't bring my chart with me, but I did have visual aids. Some go as high as 15% across the board. A few have 20 in particular zoning areas. I don't think Yonkers is one like that, but there are a few that where, but if you, 20 across the board, you don't see in Westchester at all. You just don't see it. And I didn't see it in Rockland or anything like that. But what you do, with the 20% then would be unusual. But there were a couple of municipalities where 20% was explicit to it. Bedford was one, where it was 20%, but it was to a very particular zone that they had created specifically, basically for this, and everything else was 10%.
Is there anywhere, because I know in some communities, like we were talking before about how the bonus is almost automatic because we're requiring like an inclusive number to have a certain number, where you can get up to 20%, but it's through incentives?
Well,
Or achieve a level of affordability equivalent to like a 20%, but maybe say, in other words, you start at some lower number and you know,
you work your way
you
up.
work your way up,
Yeah.
and maybe you get increased.
I'd have to check. Most of them were not that different from ours in the sense that you had this, the initial 10%, and then there was an additional density bonus if you provided, for example, very low income, which initially I think under ours is 40%. So there are some that have that. There are other municipalities that have that as well, that provide a small, you know, that you can somewhat work your way up. But if you look overall, they're all basically at 10 and 80, which is really which is the county's ordinance. When the county developed it as a result of the lawsuit, it came out to 10 and 80. You do see though more with a 60% AMI now in Westchester than you did before, but they're still at 10. They're not up to 20. But one thing I would look at, and I will look at, is there a way that they can get their numbers up to, in fact, a 20%? But there are very few that actually just start at 20, and then basically give them more than that.
But fundamentally, why do we think we need it at 20?
Well, that's,
I mean, we have no data.
That's
But,
right.
and I would suggest, I think, I would suggest that first of all, you have to decipher and establish and assess and confirm the 10% methodology has worked and is a good tool to achieve affordable housing. It seems to me like this just is a predetermined fact that is a good and noble and productive and efficient solution to achieving affordable housing. I, for one, suggest it's not. It never has been. And it's not a tool that's being grown. Maybe the numbers are being kicked around within communities. It's a tool that's being abandoned. That's what I would suggest. So, kicking around the numbers.
Abandoned by, what do you mean by
In
abandoned?
which direction?
In not having, dissolving the 10% requirement and going to other strategies.
Like the public-private partnership, which I think is,
It's like getting
Right.
skin in the game.
yeah.
Right. And I think we also have to really look at, we can't take this sort of in the abstract. We really have to look at what are the consequences. We have a small population. It's easy to do stats with us. We have a small population. We can see what's the effect, as you mentioned before, for the existing housing, and what are we doing to that? Are we just funneling more people in that is just gonna be in that low level? What are we doing to the percentage between the 70 and 80 that we now are abandoning, so to speak? Who are they? Are they people we would like to retain or ask to come in? There's so many questions that is not just about actual numbers of what you make, but representative of what we want this community to be. And I think we have Dorcas numbers. If I, who are not a statistician, can at least get some kind of spinning my head around numbers by just looking at what he had and try to figure out some ideas, then somebody who really knows their stuff can do it much better and faster. So I think again, I agree that the intent is beautiful. The intent is all
We all
valid.
agree it's noble, and we want
Very
to
noble.
advance that.
But we
Well-
just need to know that this is the right way to go.
See, I think it's interesting, but we don't have enough data to say, are we gonna help more than we hurt?
I'd say that's,
Okay,
I
I think
concur.
that's the question right now, because if we start from just what the data that Kaya brought out, is that when we look at affordability in Westchester County, Austin ranks up in the top 4 in terms of entry into the market. I think if we benchmark our rental income that are charged overall, I think the data says we have a lower, landlords in Austin make less per dwelling unit than they do in other places. They charge less, not make less. But whether they make more or not, I don't know, but they charge less overall. I think what you're telling me is that our current standard for what we agree is the affordable rent for a unit. If you benchmark it against the free market rent in Austin, they're pretty comparable. So, John, to your question, is that we haven't been able to figure out how to make our affordable housing rentals affordable to the people who live here. That's fundamentally, I think, what's driving this legislation, is that we have not, and we have not attacked that. And if that's true, which seems like the data is true, then the only way to fix that is not to create more affordable housing, but to lower the median, help less people, but give them the ability to pay the rent that's in this community that landlords need to collect.
So I understand, when you say lower the median, you mean,
So-
you're agreeing with ratcheting it down to?
No, so what I'm saying is, for rental, if, for example, if $1,400 a month is what Avalon charges for somebody who meets the affordable criteria at 80%, you pay $1,400 a month for a single bedroom unit. If I were to go into the free market of Austin, I would get roughly maybe $1,100 to $1,400 for that same kind of unit.
I'm not sure that's a great example, but with
But
that,
you
especially
gotta
with
have
Avalon,
something, you gotta have something, right? And I think generally.
I mean, I think a market rate, 1 bedroom at Avalon is over 2,000.
No, I'm not saying, I'm saying because John asked the question. We built 17 units of affordable housing in Avalon. They're there. The walk-in price is $1,400 if you meet the income level. The landlord will get the difference between that number and his fair market from someplace. That's one. But if somebody were to walk into any landlord in Austin and could find a unit, they would be around the same price as our subsidized unit, without any subsidy, So that's a problem. So then you say, all right, so then maybe we need to figure out how to lower that number, because the people who would rent that, you can't afford 80%. They can't pay that. They might be able to pay 60. But if I'm gonna lower it to 60, then I'm gonna help 50% less people, because the bucket of money that funds the gap is the same bucket of money. So that's okay. but will help less people. And that's a decision we have to figure out, whether we want to do that or not, right? And that's the simple one, because that's a rental, so that's just a math exercise. When you get into home acquisition, that drives a whole lot of other things, like, property taxes, et cetera, that go into that equation. How do you deal with all that, the gaps that are there? But they've got to be made up from someplace. And I don't think there's a check from the government anyplace that's gonna write a check to the village and town of Austin for the difference in taxes that unit's gonna pay.
And I think it gets us back to where we started, where, from a global perspective, most developers that have come in here have wanted to build more to the upscale. Because they realize that they need the upscale, more, expensive units to subsidize the affordable. So they're getting the pilot program, they're getting, the mortgage tax rebates, the IDA stuff. So, that's something we need to focus on. And I'm almost starting to think that, this kind of opens itself up into comprehensive plan time a little bit, where, this is something that might want to be considered, when we do a comprehensive plan review, because it's, doing this as a one-off piece of.
I don't personally disagree with you.
I have to say, but I think Kaya brought up an interesting point. Even if we do all of this, and we look at the developable land that exists, it's not gonna change anything. At the end of the day, in order to fix what we think the problem might be, it'd almost have to all be affordable. And we'd have to have a way to stop the backfill of what we're filling in. Because you can't generate, what do we have, 30 acres or something left in Austin really to develop? It's the fix for improving the housing stock at affordable levels is in rehabbing the existing stock, for the most part.
And considering other alternative motives to generate low-cost living.
Right.
And again, other communities have attacked this problem from those methodologies.
And we have to find, for example, with the We Can Do It building, that was a public-private partnership.
Well, the village owned land, and they transferred.
And we got 10%.
Developer.
But even if you're saying that the private housing market is not gonna can't really be changed or dealt with, well, we know that in Troy and Albany, they did community trusts where they bought up all these houses that were debilitated, they refurbished them and were able to sell them again, to people who could otherwise not afford to buy it. It is a beautiful system. They have done so much of it. They're restoring major swaths of Troy,
Oh, yeah.
That's another great example.
preserving
And
the buildings and
Right.
giving people new places to live.
That's an alternative methodology to having skin in the game, because now you're synergistically reinforcing your built environment community fabric. You're investing in it.
Or any of those things, those aren't, you could do more than one strategy to address your housing.
Yeah, so you should.
Yes, you can.
And you should.
Boy, there's a novel thought.
No, but I guess naming a number of other strategies doesn't devalue one strategy. Throughout, many communities use that set aside.
I think it's a pie chart, and it starts to, unless it's equally divided.
I think with what we have already, we discussed it with the Snowden project, what incentives can they, what kind of bonuses can we ask? What can we ask them to give them bonuses? Our bargaining tools for the few open land parcels we have now are gonna be diminished. It's gonna be very difficult for us to say, we need to, because we can use it to improve other things. And at some point, it's gonna be that people are saying, we're gonna tear down these smaller houses and try to be taller, and we go for the variances, this and this and that. And yes, there is a natural progression in terms of creating more urban feel, but it shouldn't come from a point of dire need. It should come from a point of wish. And I know this is very idealistic to say this, but if it means that we have 6 or 7 houses or buildings on Spring Street and more on the parallel street, State and behind there, that are not being fixed, that are not being rented out because there are no means for them, for people to do it. And there's no, it doesn't make sense for, let's see, me as a small contractor to go in and even have my guys work on it. I will not be able to return a profit. But if we had a private, partnership with our government, then we could create something that would work.
So I have a question, but I don't know. So Stuart, today, do we have a housing need assessment? Do we know how many units we need?
I don't think Dwork actually,
You didn't do that.
Dwork did not do, that was not Dwork's charge.
No, that was not, that, yeah.
No, he didn't.
So we need, we're back where we started this conversation. There's absolutely no data today that says do anything. Except a letter from developers that says, you might want to rethink that.
Don't do anything.
So, and one would expect that. But I think there are a lot of good ideas that came out of this discussion tonight that should be pursued. But I think it all starts with data. And before we do anything, we need to get data.
Yeah, I think data includes case studies.
Yes, yeah.
And we could certainly just count all the units that we've brought online in the past 20 years or 10 years or ever since we've had the 10% set aside and see how they've done.
That's an important
It's
data
right
point.
there. It's right in our own neighborhoods. We can do that. And, I know they've reactivated this landlord-tenant council. Maybe that's a task that they could start to do, like a needs assessment. I mean,
Steve Dewey would.
for what it's worth. I think
No, but it would be something to work at because.
it's something to think about.
Absolutely. Why not?
And you can't move toward alternate strategies until you develop and identify some alternate strategies.
For some people on Maine, that's a learning exercise, which we're continuing to
Well,
pursue.
so I think you got an opinion from the board tonight.
We did, and I thank you.
So we will await data.
Over and
Okay.
out.
Any other things to come before the board tonight? If not, we'll adjourn tonight's meeting. Did our guests, you guys manage to stay awake for all this at least? Thank you.
There's a chance I might not be here.
Anyway, have a great, all
There's
of
a
you,
chance I might not be
celebrating the
here.
holidays. Have a great holiday.
No, I might be at another.